Welcome to what I think is this week's only episode of the Gambling Files podcast. I am no, hang on. We're going to record an intro probably, aren't we? So I've probably already said that I'm one of your hosts and Fintan, other host. But I'm just going to read off my notes to introduce our guest here. The problem with notes is that they're two-dimensional and you can't, I'm not one to write inflections or anything like that. So we're joined by the lead writer of Plange.com and Planey.com, David Danzis. So he's the lead writer of playnj.com and playny.com, Katina Media. David Danzis, I got that part right. David.
You did indeed, nailed it. Most people don't get that right, so you get extra credit for that.
It's when you've got an awkward name yourself, you make an effort with other people's names. But I do like the idea of you being a lead writer. I think that would be really cool, especially given the price of lead these days. I mean, it's gone crazy.
I'm not really watching the lead markets, to be honest with you. So
really,
well, you don't have to watch the lead markets. You just have to watch what's being stolen. And like lead and copper.
Usually copper, isn't it? Right?
Lead and copper are both right up there. I mean, lead's always been expensive because it's awkward. But
I've seen somebody try and steal lead once. We were standing outside a building site. I was doing a summer job, and we were waiting for a delivery truck to arrive to deliver us some stuff. And it was in the IFSC, and it's basically like the financial district in Dublin, which is the only way to describe it, right borderline with the Badlands of Dublin. So there's a notorious street called Sheriff Street, which is famous for crime, or like the source of crime in the rest of the city. And this flatbed truck arrives, and we're taking some of the materials off. And he was doing multiple deliveries. He had rolls of lead on the back of the truck. And this like 14-year-old runs up, grabs a roll of lead, throws it over his shoulder, and starts running. I look at the driver and go, "Are you not going to stop him?" And the driver's this really kind of old Dublin bloke, and he looks at me and goes, "If he can fucking get to the end of the road with that, he can fucking have it." And as the kid is running, you can start to see it all catching up with him. So his legs start to buckle. And there's like some sort of cartoon thing where there's like this kid's legs, and he starts to sway and stagger across the road. At the exact same time, another kid shows up where he'd robbed a bicycle courier's bicycle, but it was like a fixie kind of thing. So he's coming flying around the corner at like a rate of knots. But obviously the bicycle couriers are like super fit dudes. The bicycle courier is chasing him. And so you end up with this Tom and Jerry style crash in the middle of the road of like the stolen bicycle, the lead, the kid with the buckled legs. And then the courier catches up, smacks everybody around the head, grabs his bike, and leaves. All within the space of like 45 seconds. It was an epic afternoon. That's my lead stealing story.
It's a good one.
That was a fantastically told story, by the way.
I certainly don't have any lead theft experiences that can top that. And David's a lead writer, and he's flabbergasted.
It's starting to question his credentials.
Way to bring it home, John. That was fantastic. Well done.
Woo! So David, returning guest. So that's always nice because we feel validated when people come back for a second go. Because we do.
I feel like that could be a whole separate podcast.
People who didn't come back.
Whole separate therapy session. But actually, David, you're American. In the media and things like that, we're led to believe that all Americans have therapists and think therapy is brilliant. Is that the position you ascribe to?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Possible one of my other multiple personalities might think differently, but for the time being.
Yeah, just unfortunately we've landed on this iteration of you. It's like a game of roulette.
And yeah, here I am.
Me and Fintan are both big fans of therapy.
I personally don't know anyone who admits to being in therapy. I know that's kind of the the fad these days, right? To sort of acknowledging it and working through it publicly, but I don't really know anyone, so I can't jump on that bandwagon. I'm sorry.
I think the reason that I shout about it is because actually in the UK it's still not a thing people do. But just as a self-education exercise, it was phenomenal. It's really amazing.
Being the guy from New Jersey that I am, and this might not be a joke that lands particularly well here, but I'd like to think Tony Soprano had a lot to do with getting therapy out of the closet. So that's my Jersey connection joke. If that lands, fantastic.
Yeah.
If not, I'll move on.
Best TV shows ever.
John's got the furrowed eyebrows, so I'm guessing he didn't get it. That's okay.
I'm 100% a Tony Soprano fan.
Listen,
I love that show.
I am familiar with The Sopranos. Never watched the whole thing, just dipped in and out here and there. But that's the thing, Fintan, you can say that about almost any big popular show, and I will say the exact same thing. Watched maybe 1 or 2 Game of Thrones, I don't think I've watched any of The Wire yet. The Wire is one that I do intend to watch one day.
Wire's fantastic.
But almost any of those I haven't seen, because I'd rather watch things that I'm just really curious or unsure about than things that look like an absolute dead cert. There's no reason that I would not enjoy The Sopranos. It's got everything going for it. Therefore, it's a safe bet. And so it's in my pile of things that I've saved for chronic illness. So I'll watch, I just started watching the recent Goosebumps series, right? Because I was like, do you know what? This is either going to be really good or fucking shit. It's terrific. So much fun. Really, really massively enjoying it. Really nice surprise. But watched it because I wasn't sure about it. Just saying.
Interesting.
Yeah, and yet the chronic illness eludes me.
But it also means you've missed out on some absolute classics.
Well, no, I'm only if I die first.
So at your eulogy, I'll list all the shows you missed.
And quote from them.
The single tier. Well, it's just John's favorite TV character, Tony Soprano, would say. And
there's only one media quote that I think my funeral service will require. I'm just thinking about it. There's a phenomenal episode of Frasier where he is mistakenly reported as having died, and he's absolutely horrified by how shit all the coverage is, right? And so he does this amazing exercise where he writes his own obituary and uses that as the roadmap to be the person that he wants to be.
That's a therapy thing. That's an actual.
I like that.
So you got to do the way it was presented to me once was it's your like 80th birthday or something, and you've got to prepare the family member is going to stand up, an old colleague and like the mayor of your town are all going to give a speech at your birthday. What are they going to say? And then you kind of work backwards from there in terms of your life planning and goals and things you want to achieve and all that stuff.
Mine would be like the town mayor and the pub landlord, and the mayor would be, didn't really know him. Gather he lived in the town. Pub landlord would be, really gonna miss him. He was worth over £200 a week. But the quote that I think would I don't even know why I thought of this. If there's a quote that applies to my life, I believe it comes from the great Daffy Duck in the phenomenal, maybe even his best cartoon, The Scarlet Pumpernickel, when Porky Pig and the King's forces are searching for the pumpernickel, and Daffy Duck, as in the story, is a sort of a dandy effete, noble-ish man. And he's standing there and he's got his handkerchief in his fingers like this, as the forces are whizzing by him and Porky Pig's questioning everybody, and he just says, I can't actually do a Daffy Duck impersonation. I really wish I could. That's the one I wish I could do. He says, mayhap perchance, foppish as I am, I might be the Scarlet Pumpernickel. I would love to have that on my gravestone. I love that cartoon. Sorry, I'm a big Daffy Duck fan. I
Jesus
appreciate it. I've never
Christ.
mentioned that before, but
No, you haven't. That's a new one for me.
I am a big fan of Daffy Duck.
Let's let's bring it back to David.
Yeah, so David, right?
How we doing this morning, guys?
I read this article that you'd written, and I know it's yours because your name was all over it, right? And basically, you had a plan for the rescue of Atlantic City. Now, we were talking about Atlantic City. Was it last week?
We were last week, yeah. No, week before.
Because I was talking about, so I was talking about I can't remember where it is now, but there's like a racino or a racetrack or something that's trying to become a casino that's kind of in between Atlantic City and New York. I
Sure.
thought that's pretty interesting because Atlantic City, the for me, one of the mistakes that it's made, and one of the things that Vegas got absolutely right. Vegas is really easy to get to. You can fly to Vegas from almost anywhere. You cannot fly to Atlantic City from pretty much anywhere in the world. And so Atlantic City is much hard. Like I've been in this industry for 18, 19 years or whatever. I've never been to Atlantic City. Because I'm like, well, fuck this. I'm not going all the way up to fucking New York or whatever, and then hitching down or hiring a car or getting I want it. I want a degree of convenience here.
Have I told you my story on that? My $1,000 fucking taxi ride?
Well, you're gonna have to now. Did you? Was the
So
taxi made of lead?
it was I was doing a speaking thing in Atlantic City and I was booking my flights last minute. And in my head, New Jersey's right beside New York.
It is
And
if
so
you're looking at a globe.
Well, it is. Geographically, they are right next to each other. Yes.
so I booked flights into New York. And flight was delayed, of course, and then there was like a two hour queue to get through immigration, the whole shebang. I had a car book to collect me and take me to the hotel. Jump into the car, flip open Google Maps. Okay, let's see how long. Is it 10 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever? Realize it's like 2 hours. And then it's like, right, iPad back out. Let's get back onto The Sopranos. This is going to take a while. And then we get there, and then the guy pretends he doesn't speak English. He gives me like a credit card slip to sign with like no amount on it. And at this point, I'm just so tired. I'm like, I don't care how much this costs. Let's just get it. I'll charge it back if it's ridiculous or something. And that was my, I think it was like $1,100, $1,200 taxi ride. So, yeah. Geography matters. Maps.
Fintan, let's bring this back to David. Right?
Yeah, sorry.
So you got this casino potential between AC and New York, and AC's always thrived on populous areas around it, visiting and events and stuff like that, right? I put forward the theory last week, and I know this is completely mental, but if New York is going ahead with what it is obviously going ahead with, because they've already had fucking zoning meetings and stuff, but if New York is going ahead with things, then in 10 to 15 years, there's a pretty good chance that Atlantic City, as it presently stands, is not going to be there anymore. And I suggested, well, maybe its niche could be, because any new property that's going to open in New York is going to have to toe the line of clean air. So anything that opens in New York's not going to be a smoking casino. But so maybe Atlantic City's niche could be smoking casinos. Have I just saved Atlantic City? I don't know. I don't need any royalties, but they would be nice. Sponsorships of the podcast are available. But actually, then
we'll take it.
yes, no, vape companies, we can do that. But then I read your article, and actually, yours is a lot more sensible than mine. A lot more.
So there's a lot to unpack there. All right. And I'll start with one. I mentioned I'm moving, right? I'm actually moving to Vegas. And so I've spent a lot of time looking into what Vegas is and the history of Vegas. But I've always known this as a reporter of Atlantic City, but I want to make one thing really, really clear. Comparisons between AC and Vegas are just nonsensical. Other than the fact that both places had casino gaming before anyone else in the United States, that's where the similarities begin and end. Atlantic City was an existing community, right? Where casinos were sort of inserted into Atlantic City, where Vegas was a pre-planned place where gaming grew up with the city itself, right? So Vegas has almost endless geography and places to expand. Atlantic City's on an island, right? I mean, I'm 2.3 million people in Vegas, 39,000 people in Atlantic City, right? They're not really comparable places. But your point about access falls into that idea of, again, Vegas was a planned place and Atlantic City was sort of an afterthought. Getting to Atlantic City is incredibly difficult. I grew up in North Jersey, in a place where almost all of the opening credits of The Sopranos are filmed, actually. And getting to Atlantic City was incredibly difficult for people where I grew up. When Pennsylvania got casinos in the Poconos, that was a 30-minute drive for people from my area, as opposed to the 2.5-hour drive to Atlantic City. So getting to Atlantic City is absolutely one of its problems. But to come full circle, John, my article, my opinion piece is really what it was, because I want to make this very clear. Although I reported on Atlantic City, this was strictly my opinion. And it's not conjecture. I was a reporter at the Press of Atlantic City for years, and I've been one of the few gaming reporters still covering Atlantic City exclusively for the last several years. So I have a really personal and in-depth knowledge of this. I live, 12 minutes outside of Atlantic City. And all of the things that are wrong with Atlantic City are really easy to identify. And I almost feel like it's sort of become sport for a lot of people just to point out everything that's wrong in Atlantic City. One of the things that locals here take great offense to is kind of the idea of parachute reporting. The New York Times drops in once every 10 years and writes this grandiose piece about how, Atlantic City is decaying and all of the people here are living in abject poverty. And it's so insulting to the people who live here day to day and deal with the real problems that we all talk about and what we see as what's going on here. So rather than write another one of these pieces where I'm just pointing out everything that's wrong with Atlantic City, I decided to take a different approach and talk about possible solutions. We used to joke when I worked at the Press of Atlantic City, we had an entire cabinet that was about 4 feet tall, 3.5 feet wide, filled with all of the plans that people had presented for what to do with Atlantic City. There are countless master plans and developers plans and billionaires plans. I mean, they're ridiculous. And I figured, let me just give simple solutions, right? What's really going on and how can it help long-term? So I identified 3 things that I think each of the primary stakeholders in Atlantic City could do that could have a real impact on changing both the current status of Atlantic City, but also its future, which, as you alluded to, is going to look much different when New York City finally gets its 3 full-scale, fully integrated casino resorts, which is much different than what New York City currently has now. So I decided to take a swing at something that really wasn't done very often. And I hope I at least got a few people's attention in sort of drawing out what us locals see is necessary for our survival.
So what was the first thing in your thing?
So the first thing I identified was what I think is the easiest. And it involves the city's role, and it's increasing police visibility. It's not a secret at all that law enforcement in Atlantic City is very much subjective. I made a reference in my story about running red lights and stop signs and speed limits were all, again, suggestions. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. And it feeds into the perception that Atlantic City is this lawless place. And it's not. It's no more unsafe than any other major urban area that I've ever visited, and I've done plenty of traveling, including to places where people now think are, urban, apocalyptic hellscapes like New York and Philly, which again, they're not. But Atlantic City is not a dangerous place. And its crime statistics are skewed by the fact that it has 39,000 year-round residents, but yet it gets almost 25 million visitors a year. The way our federal government does crime reporting, it looks like Atlantic City has much more crime per capita than it actually does. And it just feeds into a narrative that's not entirely true, yet the Atlantic City Police Department does little to change that narrative, change the perception. And it's not a complicated thing to do. They don't need to go out and arrest more people. They don't need to start cracking skulls and become this, hands-on law enforcement agency. They simply need to be visible. And I make that point by saying correctly that Atlantic City has more ranking officers of sergeant or above, which essentially supervisory positions and higher. They have more of those in the total numbers than they do patrolmen. So it doesn't take a whole lot of thinking to realize that, well, if the police department doesn't have people out on the streets, how are they doing their jobs? There needs to be a complete overhaul in how Atlantic City handles its law enforcement presence, and it's simply just by being visible. Cops on the boardwalk, cops in the areas where tourists go, Pacific and Atlantic Avenue. Right now, they're not doing a good enough job, and they want more police officers, and that's not the answer. The answer is they need to do a better job with the resources they currently have.
Interesting, because I think one of the things that Las Vegas does really well is give the impression that the Strip is very, very safe, when in fact it's as safe or unsafe as pretty much anywhere else. Unless you go for a run in that bit that I went into, that's really, really stupid of me, but it's by the by. But it's the impression, isn't it? It's the impression as opposed to the reality, because the impression is what will stop you from traveling there in the first place.
Yeah, it's a problem that Atlantic City has always had. And again, we talked about the comparison between Vegas and AC not really being fair. I'll point to this thing. Vegas embraces its mob history, right? It almost celebrates its ties to organized crime, right? The Mob Museum is actually one of my favorite attractions when I visit Las Vegas. I love that place. Atlantic City, sort of, it's a wink and a nod kind of thing. Like, yeah, we know, but we pretend that it didn't exist. And in doing so, it sort of continues today where Atlantic City just doesn't acknowledge its problems, right? I would argue that the overpasses over Las Vegas Boulevard, those, the walkways, are filled with more crime per square foot, per square meter for you gentlemen, than any area of the Atlantic City Boardwalk, right? And I say that as somebody who regularly walks the Atlantic City Boardwalk at odd hours of the night and sees what's really going on there. I just don't think that the perception of Atlantic City is accurate. But I think the city doesn't do itself any favors because it's not even trying to change people's minds. By simply having a few more cops that people see, it would make such a difference. And it might actually deter some of the actual crime that is taking place, therefore making the city even safer in the long run. So it actually kills two birds with one stone.
And we're all
at least in my
killing
mind,
birds on this podcast. Just a bit of shameless self-publicity now. My previous podcast was called The Bruford Files. I think you can still find episodes on Spotify. But I did an episode with a Vegas lawyer called Jeffrey Silver. And Jeffrey was working at the Nevada Gaming Commission when the mob were still in town. And it's an absolutely amazing episode. I mean, he was just phenomenal. What a geezer. Definitely. And before you move as well, listen to it before you move, because it might change your mind. So okay, we've got point number one, and point number one makes a lot of sense because the allocation of resources is as important or more important in some instances than the actual quantity of resources, because with visible policing you can actually achieve an enormous amount of crime reduction or avoidance. Yeah, with yeah, just a couple of warm bodies. So
I'm think about this. I actually, real quick, and then I'll get off the point. But when I was researching these solutions, I had a criminal justice professor tell me, think about prisons as sort of the example. And I know that's not maybe where people's minds want to go, but you can control an entire environment full of known and convicted criminals with a quarter of the number of law enforcement officers, right? You could have 5 officers for a pod of almost 100 inmates and maintain law and order. And it's simply the presence of law enforcement that keeps them in line. Now, clearly, there are other factors in line when it comes to a prison that keep people under control. But I'm saying the idea that these guys who are willing to commit crimes would simply not do so because of 5 guys wearing badges and sticks shows you the power of, again, you're the way you said it, allocating proper resources, and just the idea of crime deterrence through presence would make such a difference in Atlantic City. So just wanted to sort of chime in with that as well.
yeah, makes perfect sense. And actually, the prison example was a really, really good one. I hadn't thought of it that way, but yeah, because most of us, we want to follow the rules, as Steve pointed out in today's newsletter, in fact, about boundaries and children. Made a good point. So what was your second rescue point?
So my second point was actually directed at the casinos. And this one might be a little bit of a sore subject personally, and maybe that's why it came off a little blunt and to the point. But I'm essentially calling on casinos to stop being so damn greedy. And I know that's almost like telling a fish to stop swimming, but it's gotten to the point where if you are on social media at all and follow any gaming page on Facebook or gambling Twitter, or some of the influencers on Instagram, almost every day, regardless of what is posted, the conversation devolves into how much Vegas and Atlantic City are overcharging people and have completely eliminated what I describe as the value proposition of those two destinations. For decades, when those two locations had a monopoly on gambling in the United States, the way they attracted people was by offering a bargain, right? You knew you were going to come to Atlantic City and lose a boatload of money. But in the process of doing so, you were going to get a room. You might get a steak dinner. You might get a free ride back and forth to the airport, to the Philadelphia airport, which is an hour away. And you were going to get all sorts of perks the next time you came. Nowadays, it's hard to even get a free drink on the casino floor. And it's gotten to the point where, as a local who goes to the casinos not just for work, but also for pleasure, it's insulting to have to do things like pay a $25 parking fee on a Friday night when I already plan on spending $500 or more on dinner and possibly a little gaming. Do you really need my $25 on top of everything else you're getting at? So I'm basically calling on the casinos to just stop stepping over $1 to get to a dime. They're intentionally hurting themselves because the locals here don't go to the casinos as often as they used to because of things like crazy parking fees. And I rattle off a list of others, like $8 cups of coffee and $20 sandwiches at a deli that are prepackaged and not even made in front of you. I mean, it's just insulting. And these casinos, they're worried about the regional competition from places like New York and Pennsylvania, and even the competition from online gaming within New Jersey. And yet they're doing everything they possibly can to drive away their customers. And I don't claim to have an MBA, and I'm certainly not someone with decades of gaming experience. I'm coming up on 10, but it doesn't take a very smart person to realize that pissing off your customers is not a good business model. So I'm basically advising the casinos that if they really want to do something about 6 straight quarters of declining profits, 2 straight years A simple solution would be to probably eliminate parking fees and just chalk it up as a cost of doing business.
Interestingly, right, I've made the exact same point, possibly more controversially, because I made it about Las Vegas when it was saying month after month of growth on growth on growth. They're saying this is not sustainable because you're gouging the customer at every single point. Dog's going bonkers. Sorry. You know, and it was the same thing. Like, I don't think you can get free parking anywhere on the strip anymore. Maybe the Strap, which is
The
like right at the north end.
locals will get 3 hours of free parking at most of the strip casinos.
Okay,
And that,
but
and
most
that's something
locals
that
don't
Vegas
go to the strip anyway, do they?
Not at all. You're absolutely right. And that's why they do it. They want to try to attract the locals and they can't.
But like
locals
the
got pissed
parking
off.
fees at the Sphere are extraordinary. You know, you're doubling the cost of your ticket.
Sure.
And we are talking about places that do have quite a lot of parking. Admittedly, the Sphere doesn't have a lot of parking, but the places around it have raised their parking costs because they're by the Sphere. And you know, the resort fees, it's like,
Well,
they're a little
I'll ask you
annoying.
this.
But who the
What does a
fuck
resort fee get you?
who the fuck expects to pay for Wi-Fi now? It's 2024.
Or Fintan, when was the last time you made a local call using a casino phone? Never?
Never,
Yeah,
never.
me neither. You're paying $35 a night for the privilege, though.
Yeah, but you
Right? And
could have made
that's
one.
insulting.
Yeah, I could have masturbated in the lift as well, but I didn't. It's maybe not my best analogy, but
Methinks doth protest too much, John.
there's cameras everywhere now.
That's what he likes.
Well, no, the problem for me was when the police came and I was like, can I get a copy of that film? No, just for the record, that never happened. I did fart in a lift once, and that was quite controversial. But apart from that, no, that's all my elevator action. No, but I made the exact, because Vegas is doing the exact same thing, but they're assuming it's fine because they're setting record revenues.
Well, revenue and profits are not the same thing, right?
Yeah.
And
which is the point that you made in a column a few months ago.
I did, didn't I? Thank you for reading my work, John. I do appreciate it. I did make that point. And it's important. It's an important point, right? Because we do obsess over the monthly revenue numbers. But when we look at quarterlies, or we look at, when these public companies release their mandatory filings, we realize that it's not really as great as we all think it is. And there's a lot of reasons why, labor costs and things. I don't even want to really go down that rabbit hole, but revenue is not profit. Revenue you don't take to the bank. You take profit to the bank. And the truth is, some of these bigger corporations like Caesars, like MGM, I don't want anybody to feel like they're pleading poverty, but they're not posting the numbers that they should be posting. And they're certainly not posting the numbers they want to be posting. And a lot of that has to do with eliminating the value proposition in the two largest gaming markets in the United States. It's not a coincidence that those two companies that have a presence almost everywhere are struggling to hit their growth numbers, while they're also the two companies that are most often associated with nickel and diming their customers to death.
I think also, and I'm not 100% sure about what I'm about to say, but we're also talking about the two properties that sold, the two entities that sold all their real estate.
And created real estate investment trusts that are really just sanctioned pyramid schemes. But yeah, we can talk about that on another podcast if you want.
But if they are, so sometimes real estate investment trusts are index linked, and with the rate of inflation recently, then they may have well been getting absolutely spanked on their rent. I'm not saying that they have been or that they are index linked, but I have heard of deals like that being index linked, and so the way inflation has been of late, they could have had a great couple of years of revenue, which has just been spunking out the back door to their landlords.
I'm not going to connect to that, but there might be a connection to the reason why Bally's isn't in a rush to build a new casino on the site of the soon-to-be demolished Tropicana in Las Vegas. And it might have something to do with what you just mentioned. may or may not.
But presumably they're still going to have to pay rent. But then if their
Yeah, to the tune
rent
of about $10
has,
million a year. Yeah.
but then some things in Vegas happen because it's cheaper to cheaper to maintain a certain status quo, or to achieve and then maintain a certain status quo. The famous story is always the Sands Expo Center, which presumably you've been in. Have you ever been in Sands Expo Center during setup?
No.
It is absolutely bonkers. So you're in there and they're moving these forklifts in with these slot machines and stuff on for G2E, and the floor is bouncing. And I don't mean the floor is moving a little bit. I mean the floor is bouncing enough to make you wobble on your feet standing still. It's going up and down and up and down. Like sometimes you see it in football matches when there's a stand and everybody's jumping up and down in the stand. You can see how much the stand moves. It's like that. And the story goes that when they were doing stuff in the basement area, they took out some of the supporting columns. And in fact, the building is supposed to be what's the word? When it's like not fit for use.
Condemned.
Yeah, the building is condemned, but it's cheaper to keep paying the fines than it is to actually just fix what's wrong. So the story goes.
I don't doubt
know
that
if
at
that's
all.
true, but it's too easy to believe it, isn't it? It's just it's
such a
so
gambling industry
believable.
thing. It's just the cost of doing business.
It is a gambling industry thing. It's like, well, yeah, we're still going to market to these players, even though we're going to get fined massively for it because it's what we do. It's such a gambling industry thing. But anyway, I got sidetracked there. Sorry, David. So, well, everything makes sense so far, but what, pray tell, was pillar 3?
So before I get to the third point, I have a note here that I want to address. My wife just pointed out to me that I probably was a condescending douche to you guys before when I mentioned the fact that feet to meters. So I want to apologize publicly to both of you, as my good wife just pointed out to me. You're a douche.
I like that she's giving you live notes. That's some
Also,
proper wifing. That is good.
I've never even met her, but I know she's too good for you.
Way out of my league. Way out of my league.
The thing is, right, in the UK, feet and inches, totally cool. Mainland Europe, meters. So for me, I'm good. Fintan is in Amsterdam listening to this, so he probably got really confused.
I'm definitely a square meter kind of guy.
No, but she correctly pointed out that you guys sound like intelligent guys and I sounded like an asshole. So anyway, there's my apology. Pillar 3, as you mentioned, John. So my third solution for fixing Atlantic City actually requires the state of New Jersey to step in. Now, this one is really, really complicated and complex, and I'm going to try to give the Cliff Notes version here. Atlantic City is the only municipality in the entire country that is controlled by a state government. The state of New Jersey actually makes bureaucratic and financial decisions for the state of New Jersey. They did this because the finances of Atlantic City were so poor and so terrible following the 2008-2009 recession and the impact of Pennsylvania launching its own casino gaming industry, that the state of New Jersey had to step in and basically prop up Atlantic City. So with the state of New Jersey in charge of Atlantic City, things have gotten marginally better, I guess you could argue. If you're a cynic, you could probably say that the city's debt is still 2.5 times its annual budget, which is incredibly concerning. You could also point to things like we've been talking about, right? That the perception of Atlantic City has not improved under state leadership. The casinos have been able to essentially get away with highway robbery under the state supervision. And yet I'm calling on the state to step up and do something. And specifically what I'm asking them to do is reallocate a tax that is already levied on online casino gaming revenue and direct that back to Atlantic City. And the reason why I want them to do that is because the entire concept of legal casino gaming in New Jersey was designed, created, and voted on by the people of New Jersey for the sole benefit of Atlantic City. That is the entire reason we have casinos. It was an idea that was pitched as urban renewal through gambling. The idea was that Atlantic City could benefit from increased economic growth or economic activity, and therefore grow itself beyond just a seaside tourism beach town. It's debatable whether that's worked or not, right? But it's a 46-year experiment that we're still talking about, and it's still active. And in which case, that means that the state still has a responsibility to Atlantic City to ensure that whatever gains are made from legal gambling benefit Atlantic City in some way, shape, or form. And right now, the way that the online gaming regulation and law is written, very little of that money makes its way back to Atlantic City. So right now, there is a proposal to double the tax rate on online casino revenue to about 30%. And I'm calling on our state representatives to negotiate a percentage of that increase come back to Atlantic City and be used for very specific purposes. And that is completely up to them to negotiate. But obviously, I would think things like infrastructure, public safety, enforcing zoning laws, and things like that should certainly be at the top of the priority list. But I'll leave those details to people much smarter than myself. But from my standing and from anybody in Atlantic City, we know that the casinos are losing ground, right? The land-based casinos are losing ground. Online casinos are growing. And therefore, if Atlantic City is going to continue to benefit from legal gaming in New Jersey, the state needs to step in and make sure that some of the money from online casinos come back to the Jersey Shore.
I have a lot of dumb questions, so bear with me.
Yeah.
So New Jersey, obviously New Jersey is different to a lot of the other states, or particularly say Pennsylvania, where there's like an unlimited number of licenses for.
It's not unlimited. There's 5 per licensee. You can have 5 skins per licensee. So each of the 9 casinos in Atlantic City can have 5.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's 2 online only entities that are licensed in New Jersey that can have 5 as well. So we can have up to 50 online casinos here in New Jersey.
So so it's up to, sorry, apologies. So it's up to 50. But so like you said, then there's a land-based licensee with 5 skins. So they've got 5 online partners. So clearly then there'll be some sort of arrangement with the online partners or the online skins. So they're already making money from online. Would be the first thing, or
yes and no.
Are they not?
So here's an important factor to remember. So New Jersey was the first state in the United States to really embrace online casinos. We did it in 2013. A lot of the agreements that were signed between online operators and land-based operators in New Jersey were signed pre-COVID. Pre-COVID, online casino revenue was struggling to hit $40-50 million a month. It was a total afterthought, right? Online casinos were not really that a serious part of the equation in New Jersey. Beginning in COVID, and certainly that has only accelerated post-COVID, online casinos now account for more than 50% of all gross gaming revenue reported monthly in New Jersey. So the pie has grown for online casino operators, but the agreements that were struck pre-COVID still exist. Now, I allude to the fact that in my article, I've seen some of these agreements, and I've had to actually sign NDAs, so I can't get into real details. I'll tell you right now, the 5 to 10% estimate that Steve Ruddick gave in his Straight to the Point newsletter is actually high. There's some land-based operators that signed agreements for less than 5%. So yes, they're making money. Of course, any money is better than no money, but I don't want anybody to be under the impression that land-based operators in Atlantic City are making bank off of the online casino growth, because that's not the reality.
Okay. All right, so that makes sense. So there's a contractual issue there where they've undersold the revenue share agreements.
And the online operators, they are under no obligation to renegotiate these contracts, and the land-based operators that they're tethered to have no leverage to initiate renegotiation. So
yeah,
they're
so
at a standstill. They're not going.
You'd imagine the only leverage would be where it's a multi-state operator and like a multi-state online brand, and a what I mean, like maybe they could, okay, we'll sort us out here and we'll make sure you get the skin license in a different state or something like that. So potentially there's scenarios like that, but that's a very niche scenario given what's going on, particularly where we're at right now, particularly for casino in the US. Okay, so that makes sense. The concept of so the other question is, so you made the point of the laws were originally passed to support Atlantic City. Walk me through, like, because typically, like, when the laws get passed, like, to do like an online gambling bill, it's like it's going to go into education and it's going to go into public service, like it's going to go to big headline stuff that's very difficult to say no to, right? What happened where it was to support Atlantic City was the reasoning behind passing the original bill for New Jersey?
Well, the reason for dedicating the money to Atlantic City actually traces back to the 1964 Democratic Convention. It took place at Boardwalk Hall in Atlantic City, and the national press had come here and seen the deterioration of Atlantic City. It had once been a vaunted vacation destination, particularly on the East Coast of the United States, but it was one of the original sort of seaside towns that really thrived from the automobile and middle-class Americans being able to travel, right? By the late 60s, that had disappeared because airline travel had taken over and people were now flying to Florida and California and other places. So the state legislature came up with this brilliant idea that in order to revitalize Atlantic City, it needed a shot in the arm, right? It needed something to really jumpstart its economy. And it was clear that tourism alone was not going to do it. So they wrote the law and they asked voters to approve it in a way that confined casinos only to Atlantic City and therefore ensured that any financial benefit went to Atlantic City. Now, to your point, the law does state that some of the tax revenue has to go towards funds that benefit all people in New Jersey, particularly seniors and the disabled. The Casino Revenue Fund in New Jersey is funded wholly through casino taxes, and that money is used for things like the disabled and senior transportation, food delivery programs, prescription drug assistance programs, a lot of things like that. There's also money that goes directly into the state budget, which is, the state can use for anything essentially. And it has been, because it's in control of Atlantic City, using that money to plug budget short holes in the city's municipal budget to ensure that it doesn't go further into debt. The city actually the state spends about $65 million a year giving aid to Atlantic City. And I mentioned the city's budget is about $230 million. So the state is propping up Atlantic City through gaming taxes that are used or that are generated in Atlantic City.
I might have a stupid question.
Shoot.
So back in 1964, people were looking at Atlantic City and thinking, wow, this is a bit of a dump. And people have been doing that ever since. And nobody at any point has thought, do you know what? It's time we put this fucking dog down.
Reese Pally did. Reese Pally was a local politician and a sort of eccentric character in Atlantic City's history who actually proposed a bulldozer 3 blocks wide, leveling the entire southeast inlet and starting over.
I like this guy.
So someone actually did have that idea. Yeah, it's been bantied about before.
But why? Okay, so given it's such a an ongoing challenge and the amount of money that the state is putting in to prop up Atlantic City, because it sounds like it's running at a loss and it has been for a while. Yes. Yeah. Are they happy to do that because it's a big employer, or like because you would think at some point it's like, well, we could put this money elsewhere. Like, is votes, like what's the incentive for politicians to support AC?
It absolutely is the first one. Atlantic City casinos employ over 20,000 people. in South Jersey. And the South Jersey area basically encompasses 6 counties in New Jersey. And while it's not as densely populated as the northern part of the state, casinos are really the only economic driver in South Jersey. It's casinos and healthcare, and beyond that, it's government, right? So, not really great employment opportunities in South Jersey. So, without the casinos, let me back up to this. Let me put it this way: in 2008 and 2009, when the recession hit, Atlantic City and Atlantic County ended up with the highest foreclosure rate in the entire United States. And that was the result of tens of thousands of casino workers losing their jobs. When in the years that followed the recession, 5 casinos closed in Atlantic City. It absolutely decimated everything down here. Not only did houses get foreclosed on, but local businesses were closed because their clientele could no longer afford to shop there. It had a ripple effect, right? I don't need to explain economics to you guys. You understand how that works. It was absolutely terrible down here. So the state of New Jersey has made a very concerted effort to ensure the long-term viability of Atlantic City, given its importance to not just this county and this city, but the entire larger South Jersey region.
I think after the 2008 recession as well, it's worth pointing out that the 4th biggest employer in New Jersey was Bon Jovi.
The Springsteen fans are going to come after you for that one, just so you know.
He is but one man, whereas Bon Jovi, it's a band. It's very different economic.
Bon Jovi's a lifestyle, some might argue, John.
It's very true. And there's all of their hairspray producers and all of those associated businesses. Do you know what I mean? I don't need to explain economics to you guys.
So I hope that makes sense. I hope I sort of answered your questions on why New Jersey has a responsibility to Atlantic City, not just as we talked about, sort of as a larger picture, but I mean, legally by law, it has to do these things. So if it's going to start collecting more money from online casino taxes, some of that money needs to come back to Atlantic City.
But two things that are worth thinking about, though. One is, if that law didn't exist, then you would basically be saying, yeah, the casino companies need to go to the Senate, and they need to say, please, can we have some money from those guys because they've got more than us. But that law does exist, so let's jump on that.
Well, that law is also why your segue in the very beginning about Jeff Corral and his idea that there's going to be a casino at the Meadowlands in North Jersey is also a pie in the sky idea and has been for 30 years. There will never be a casino in North Jersey. It'll never
just
happen.
Has to be the threat of one.
Maybe. I don't know how that benefits him, but he's been threatening that for a long time. It's not going to happen. Again, as somebody who grew up in that area, I will bet my measly writer's salary, my annual salary, that there is never a casino in North Jersey.
Okay. I mean, I got nothing
Write
to
it
bet
down.
against
Book
it.
it.
I got nothing to bet against it. Got even less, I think. I can bet my crappy broken down car that's outside. What was the other thing I was thinking of there? So it's the other thing is, though, if the area is running at has this huge debt, then at some point that debt's got to be paid down. So if there is an increase in online taxes, some of that money surely got to go into that, because otherwise it's just going to stay there forever.
So it actually does. There's a state agency in Atlantic City. It's called the Casino Reinvestment Development Authority, or CREDA, CRDA for short. CREDA gets a set percentage. It's about 1.25% of all the verticals, right? So land-based, sports betting, and online. It gets about 1.25% of that money. And since 2018, it's been using that money specifically to satisfy the city's debt obligations. So it's been paying about $43 to $48 million a year since 2018 towards paying down the city's debt. The city's debt at last check, and when they passed the 2024 budget, was still about $425 million. So yay, CREDA for paying down that debt, but they still got a ways to go.
Yeah, because you got interest and all that as well. But if the interest is less than 10%, then they're going to be making a dent. So it's something. At least they're not going to be just,
It's something.
pissing in the wind
That's what it
forever.
is.
Well, yeah, say it's 5% interest, it's still 20 years, it's still only 20 years if the revenues stay static. So it's not so bad. It's not like Manchester United. I mean, Manchester United is essentially, and I'm not speaking as a Manchester United supporter because I'm not one, but this is a football club that is an economy the size of small countries, was bought by a leveraged buyout, and so, had all that debt saddled onto it. That debt is too large to go anywhere, ever. It's like that's how they exist now, and that's just the way it is. Unlucky. Football's bonkers. I don't even know how I got onto football. Let's not talk about football.
Yeah, I don't know how to make the comparison between a privately owned football club and a public government, but I assume that the city can't continue to operate the way it is and function, particularly if it doesn't have a source of revenue, if the casinos are
Yeah,
on
that's totally where I was going with that. But also, it was a publicly traded company before it became privately owned, and it was, as I say, a leveraged buyout of those shares.
So not a well-run public company is what you're saying.
But that's the risk of any public company, isn't it? Yeah,
It is. It
you want
is.
the money, you got to put your ass in the window, kind of thing. I'm coming back to Fintan being in Amsterdam, aren't I? Sorry, chaps.
Um,
That
I've
was
got.
fantastic.
I do have a question. Why are you moving to Vegas?
Taking a new job.
Oh yeah, what's that? Can you tell us?
I can't.
Is it good?
It's great.
Is it on Nevada's premier news outlet?
I guess that would be a subjective question. I'm going to say yes, probably because that helps me with my future employer.
Well, we've had a writer from Nevada's premier news outlet on this podcast, and I'm a
Who
big
is that?
fan of his. We had
Who's
Howard
that?
Stutz. Howard Stutz from the Nevada Independent.
Howard is amazing and absolutely fantastic, and someone that I
He is
would love
terrific.
to emulate.
I'm
Because
a big fan.
I don't think I could be half the journalist that Howard is.
Oh,
But
he's one of those writers. Like, if his name's on it, I'll read it, even if it's about fucking school teachers striking. I'm just be like, yeah, it'd be worth it.
I actually just emailed him yesterday. Howard, I wouldn't say we're friends. We're obviously colleagues and associates, and yeah, I'm also a huge fan. But no, I'm not going to work at the ND with Howard.
That is a shame because they're doing some fantastic work.
I agree.
It's really nice when you're seeing it, a news organization taking an unusual structure and really making it work. But you're not going there, so
Announcement coming soon. I promise.
okay. Well, Vegas is nice. I mean, ish.
I'm moving there in the middle of summer, so I'm not. No one ever accused me of being an intelligent person. So I
Yeah,
thank
it's
you for
true.
having me on and letting me ramble like an idiot. But clearly, I'm not a very smart man.
I think autumn or winter would be the optimum times to move. Spring in Vegas is weird. Like, I've never
When
had allergies in my life, but like, you walk outside and you can see the pollen in the air. And you walk past parked vehicles and they've got like Martian dust on them. It's all the imported plants, and they're all pollinating at the same time, and the air is, you can. And I made the mistake of going for a run, and I was coughing for a week after going for a run because I just thought, it'll be all right. I had to buy antihistamines and everything. Yeah, Vegas in spring is weird, very, very strange. But it's because I'm an idiot. But anyway, David, so a source has informed me. I'm just going to have to get my source on the screen. A source has informed me that Cobra Kai, the final season, is going to be 5 episodes in July, 5 episodes in December, and 5 further episodes in 2025. What are your thoughts on that?
Ralph Macchio for president. That's pretty much all I got on that. I've actually never seen an episode of Cobra Kai.
I would have said William Zabka for president because, you know, he's obviously the hero, but
Ralph Macchio's from New Jersey.
oh, well, I'm a huge fan of The Outsiders.
I gotta stick with my people, John.
And he's brilliant in The Outsiders because Johnny's a difficult role, I think. It's probably the hardest one in that. To be sympathetic to the character without eventually at some point thinking, Jesus Christ, I wish this wet fart would shut up. It's a balancing act. I love that movie. Might even watch it tonight. But anyway, I'm digressing again. David, thank you so much for joining us. And going into more detail and depth about that, and particularly the really fascinating part of this conversation for me was the 1964 and the law. That's pretty mind blowing. And if they don't exploit that one, then they don't really deserve to be in business, do they?
Yeah, I might have my history wrong. It might not be 64, but I know it was in the 60s. It was before 68. I want to say it was 64. It was in Boardwalk Hall in Atlantic City.
Well, look, you've probably got like a 1 in 7 chance
Still
of being
like
right, then,
25
haven't you?
years before me.
I like those odds.
Guys, thanks for having me on. I do appreciate it.
Sweet. David, thank you. But if you've enjoyed this episode of the Gambling Files podcast, please find us on LinkedIn. Give us a big, juicy, succulent like. That nearly went wrong. You can find us under the name The Gambling Files Podcast. You can find us on Twitter under The Gambling Files. I think the handle is just @GamblingFiles. You can connect to myself, John Bruford, or Fintan Costello, also on LinkedIn. We're also both on Twitter. And you can find all of our previous episodes at www.thegamblingfiles.com. If you enjoyed it, please share, tell your friends, tell your family, tell your colleagues, and we'll see you next time.